I was trapped off farm with a creepy neighbor. I live alone in a converted barn across from an old farmhouse with a small dirt path that connects the two. The farm used to belong to my grandparents, but it was divided into two parts when they died. My mom's sister, my Aunt Claire and Uncle Gary took the house with my cousin, who has since moved across state. My mom inherited the barn, which I rent from her. The whole area is susceptible to flooding, which made it near impossible to run the farm. Most of the animals had been gone for years now, with just one cow and a small chicken coop left. COVID hit us hard. We lost my aunt to the disease. That was pretty much the final nail in the coffin for the farm, since she was the one who did all the work while my uncle spent most of his time drinking. This led to a battle over the deed to the house. My aunt and uncle weren't married, so my mom insisted that the house was hers. I honestly couldn't tell you who was in the right, but we were all grieving, so no one was in the best state, mentally. My uncle ended up selling the cow, which struck up a huge blowout between him and my mom, and eventually Gary agreed to move in with my cousin. When the lockdown measures were introduced, people were crying out for new homes, so my mom thought it would be a good idea to rent out the house. As I couldn't work or pay rent, it was decided that I'd look after the chickens until COVID was over. My new neighbor moved in almost right away. He was odd. Each morning as I tended to the chickens, he'd stand at the back door of the farmhouse, slurping a cup of coffee as he watched me work. And then came the rain. The water filled the fields inch by inch, engulfing the area around the farm, leaving only an hourglass shape. There was a few feet of land left around each building, and the path was still clear enough that I could walk from the barn to the coop at the back of the farmhouse. The next morning as I collected the eggs, he was there again, staring at me. I felt like a prisoner being watched by a guard. He looked suspicious of me, and I definitely had my suspicions about him, but I thought I'd give a peace offering. I mean, we were pretty much trapped now, so it was a given that he was going to be my only form of human interaction for a while. I couldn't take the eggs to the market, and there was no use letting them go off, so I held out a basket with half a dozen. He immediately rested his coffee on the side and reached for them. There was plenty of space on the handle for him to grab, but instead he brushed my hand, trying to play it off like an accident. He reached into the basket and pulled out 2 eggs. It creeped me out, but lockdown made people lonely, I supposed, so I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. "You can take more," I told him. "These will do, for now," he replied, suggestively. I gave a nervous laugh and skipped away before it got weirder. Later that night, as I tried to pass excruciating boredom, I began to hear creaking noises around the barn. I didn't think much of it, old barns tend to squeak. But the noise persisted as I tried to sleep. Eventually, though, I managed to drift off. That was until I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming shut. I instantly thought of my neighbor. Country girls are tougher than they look, and not a chance in hell was I going to feel threatened in my own home by that creep. I reached for the baseball bat beside my bed and stormed to the door. Grabbing the handle, I pulled, but it was locked. It was a solid door with a pretty hefty lock, so no one was getting in without a key. Coming to my senses, I laughed and went back to bed. Morning rose and hunger set in. I slumped down to the kitchen and brewed some coffee as I started to prepare breakfast. I reached into the basket for 2 eggs, and as I cracked one into the pan, I came to a haunting realization: the basket was empty. I took 6 eggs at collection yesterday, my neighbor took 2, so there should be 2 left. My legs shook both through fear and adrenaline. The authorities wouldn't be able to make it through the flood, so I'd have to take measure into my own hands. I left the barn and stormed up the path towards the farmhouse. I stepped up onto the porch, and before I had the chance to knock, I slipped, falling flat onto the wood. I tried to push myself up, but slipped again from the thick liquid that pooled beneath me. Holding my hand towards my face, I saw red. It was blood. I resisted the urge to scream, burying my mouth into my bicep. I began to inch back, tiptoeing to try not to make a sound. Looking around, I saw the blood trailing over to the chicken coop. I looked up to the heavens, praying for strength before advancing towards the hutch. There, piled up with their heads cut off, the chickens had all been killed. "Thanks for the eggs." A familiar, unsettling voice croaked from behind me. I slowly turned to see my neighbor in his usual spot, casually leaning against the door frame, coffee in hand. There was no need to hold in my scream anymore. I let out a distressing shriek, causing him to drop his mug. With the distraction, I ran. He followed after me. I got to the barn and closed the door, bolting it shut behind me. I felt another wave of fear as it hit me. He'd been in the barn before, and he managed to get into the coop without breaking it. He must have had a key. I ran up to my room and retrieved my bat and my phone as my neighbor pounded on the door as relentless as my heartbeat. I called my mom. "Mom, what keys did you give the new tenant?" I screamed. I don't know. "What's wrong?" "Mom, did you give that psycho the key to the barn?" "No, Gary gave him the keys, but I told him to make sure he took the barn key off." "What's going on?" she fretted, but I didn't have time to answer her. I hung up and dialed my Uncle Gary to ask him the same question. The pounding stopped. There was long vibration, followed by a fumbling sound emanating from the kitchen. As the sound stopped, the dial tone pierced my ears. I crept towards the kitchen, and like a scene from the most horrific slasher, my Uncle Gary stood, gripping a knife covered in blood. I shot to the front door and unbolted it, but before I had a chance to escape, I felt my hair being pulled back. I tried swinging the bat, but Gary just tore it out of my hands and tossed it to the ground before throwing me down. I panicked, thinking surely my fate was sealed, but then the door swung open. My neighbor stood in the doorway with the sun beaming behind him, illuminating him like a knight in shining armor. Reacting quickly, he picked up the discarded bat. Gary moved towards him, but he avoided the attack, stepping to the side and swiftly striking Gary in the temple. As my uncle fell down, my new hero grabbed me by the hand, and this time it was welcomed. He pulled me up and we both ran to the farmhouse. My neighbor called the police as I kept watch. They responded a lot faster than I was expecting, probably because half the world was on lockdown. From the window, I could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the water on the ground, but the police just stood at its border, too scared to get wet. It wasn't long after that my uncle emerged from the barn looking defeated. With his arms in the air, he began wading through the flood towards them, handing himself over. I'll be honest, I almost felt sorry for him. Looking back, I don't think he actually intended to hurt me, but with the state he was in, who knows what would have happened if my neighbor wasn't there. He was sentenced to 1 year for battery and is now back living with my cousin, who I still keep in contact with. We have a restraining order on my Uncle Gary, but I do see him occasionally drifting through the background while I'm on Zoom with my cousin. He's apparently quit drinking and has gotten his life back on track, but I'm still not ready to forgive him just yet. Maybe one day I will. It's quite hard to blame him entirely. Grief can turn people into animals. The clicking coming from my closet. Being a kid, your mind tends to play tricks on you. Your imagination can run wild. Sometimes you believe you heard strange noises or even seen something uncanny, something that does not belong in this world. That being said, I have been reminded recently of a really odd event that plagued my childhood. A clicking sound coming from my closet. It started when I was around 7. I have no siblings and lived alone with my mother, who was extremely strict when it came to bedtime. She tucked me in at 9:30 every night, making sure every light was switched off. I would revive a kiss on the forehead for following her routine and be left alone to sleep. This was nothing new. I had been doing this over and over, ever since I grew consciousness. But this night was different. My room was quite small, my bed taking up more than a quarter of my room and a TV that sat in front of me. The window that was never shut hovered to the right of me, and the closet stood straight to the left next to my door. It was an ordinary closet, nothing strange, spooky or unusual about it. Plain oak wood colored it, and my cloths and shoes were packed tightly in. Boxes of toys filled the roof of the closet, making it extremely claustrophobic. Even when playing hide and seek with friends, no one was dumb enough to chance hiding in there and not being found. That's why at the age of 7 I found it rather frightening to hear such a noise. The room was pitch black, and shutting my eyes hardly made a difference. No sound ever entered as I slept in silence. Then I heard it. Click. It wasn't too loud. In fact, if my bedroom hadn't been soundless, I would have ignored it. Through my innocence, I believed one of my action figures perhaps fell. I tried to go back to sleep. Not long later, after the non-comforting click seemed to have disappeared, I began slowly falling back into slumber. Until I heard it again. Click, click. This time it doubled in a short pause, becoming louder as if it was closer. Was it action figures clattering, a horse's noisy joints clogging its way down a field, the snapping of a twig in the woods, someone rolling and popping their tongue, cracking their knuckles outside my window, or was it something more sinister? All I knew is that I did not want to find out. I lay in prayer underneath the suffocating but protective company of my quilt as I begged the noise would stop. And it did. I spent the whole night and early hours of the morning awake, petrified of hearing the click, but it had gone. That morning I did not dare to take a peek inside. I explained to my mother what had happened over breakfast. She brushed it off, explaining it could have been a million things making that noise. For weeks my nightly privacy remained hushed, only hearing the weather outside my window. The clicking had become a lost memory, carrying on with my simple, sweet, little life. It had been totally forgotten. In the darkness again the nights repeated. A kiss goodnight, then eyes shut. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. The sound lit up my room. My heart began to sink up into my throat. It made my breath run heavy as I struggled for air. I took a glance. The closet was peered open. A little gap only big enough to slide a piece of paper through appeared. I had not left it open. Did I? The retreat back into my covers was my only form of escape. That night was misery. I stayed up as to not alert the entity in my closet that I was convinced was real. I didn't dream of confronting the click. I stayed up all night and morning again, holding my small bladder that burst not long after. Frozen in fear, I hid until my mother came in to wake me up. I pointed to the closet, which she opened. Nothing was there. For pissing in my bed and staying up all night, my TV license was confiscated. She repeated herself, telling me, "Nothing is in there, you are just hearing things, it's just your mind playing tricks on you." The clicking did not stop. They became more frequent. Every night I heard it. Sometimes once, sometimes 10 times, sometimes it was loud, sometimes it was quiet. This went on for months. I became that used to it I stopped hiding. I just listened. Eventually the living nightmare that had become a reality was weighing me down. I remember my mother taking me to the hospital. They said I had extremely high stress and lack of sleep for a little boy. Sleeping pills were prescribed to me. My routine had changed from a kiss on forehead to swallowing bullet-sized balls. At least the clicking stopped. I don't know what it was, but an urge came over me. I wanted to know if what I heard was just a noise. I placed the pill at the back of my mouth, taking a sip of water and waiting for my mother to leave. I spat it out. Patiently I rested my head against my pillow, almost hoping to hear it. Some time had passed and there was nothing. In a way I was disappointed. I began questioning myself. I guess my mind really was playing tricks on me. At that moment, I heard it. Not a click, but a squeak. The squeak of my closet door being pushed open. Being completely honest, I was terrified to even look, never mind getting up and investigating who or what had just opened my closet. But somehow, in some dumb defiance, bravery and courage rushed my souls. The darkness surrounded me, my closet resembling a black hole. Nothing but a void of emptiness. By the time my feet touched the carpeted floor, my body was uncontrollably shaking. Slowly and carefully, I tiptoed across the soft ground. I made it. The door, which was already half open, began squeaking again. The noise was agonizing, like chalk being scraped across a blackboard. This sent me stumbling back, nearly falling in fright. The unknown had terrorized me for too long. I need to know what was clicking in my closet. I entered. Click. A flash struck my face, leaving me blinded. My vision remained blurred as I heard heavy footsteps pass me by. After my eyes began to clear, I switched on the lights. The rustling must have triggered my mother to come rushing and holding a metallic bat. She grabbed me in an embracing hug. During this I could see my window completely wide open. Behind me my mother noticed something else. Most of my clothes, shoes and toys were missing. She reached in the closet. It was a photo. I told you there was clicking in my closet. You are probably wondering why I decided to share a disturbing part of my childhood with random people online. Well, it happens around 30 years ago, and I have moved past it now. I have a wife and a little boy. A little boy who brought this memory back to me. He's been telling me he hears whispers at night. I found a coffin in the woods. As a 10-year-old, as most can admit, I had an overactive imagination. Although I can't prove what I saw those nights was real, this story shaped who I am today, and the eagerness to share this story has sunk as deep as a National Geographic treasure hunter ship in the ocean, and seeing all you share your stories of disdain, it makes me feel almost normal for experiencing that fateful night. It was my 10th birthday. I had only a few friends at the time, and to this day I can't believe anyone showed up with the theme being Ben 10. There were 4 of us, those being me, Alex, Sarah, and Tom. Somehow we had all convinced the oblivious adults to allow us to explore the small patch of trees barely able to be called forest, but still big enough to get lost in. We walked out the door, leaving the terribly inflated green balloons and sideways hung tapestries behind. We waved goodbye and headed out behind the house. What if we see a serial killer? Sarah called out to the rest of us boys who were so far ahead of her we could barely hear. Oh, don't worry, dear princess, your chivalrous knight will defend you, Tommy called back, making fake stab motions pretending to fight back monsters or whatever creatures were filling his young mind. Tommy, you couldn't even fight off Daryl at school a week ago. Me and Alex laughed as we stopped for the rest to catch up. Hey, Tommy said sheepishly as his arms fell back in place, he's like 7 feet tall. Well, I still thought it was brave, Sarah said with a smile as she patted his shoulder, just reaching his place in the field. Come on guys, I dragged out as I started walking slowly into the tree line so the rest could catch up. They're gonna expect us back soon and I want to see something cool. Little did my 10-year-old mind know that I was gonna see something cool, at a price. The woods, even though patchy, were still clogged with trees. Although some stories say that the sounds of the forest fill your ears the moment you step in. I can only remember now that it was eerily quiet that day. We were too busy being kids to feel the dense silence in the air. Hey, stop that, I swatted at Tommy as he slid behind me, pretending as if he wasn't just pulling at my shoulder-length hair for the past 5 minutes. I'm bored, Alex said sluggishly behind us. Well, is the party behind us really any better? I asked. No, he said quietly, his shoulders slouching a bit. Exactly. I noticed that the 2 boys drift off the path as Tommy spotted a squirrel, and the adventure began for him and Alex. I was left alone with Sarah. I didn't know her that well, she was Alex's cousin, and we had only spoken a few times during school. So, she said, taking a few steps to my side, you get anything cool for your birthday? I was too busy looking at her very long auburn hair to hear her question as I hit her with a small hum. Your presents, she chuckled, placing her hands behind her back. Oh yeah, really cool stuff. I tried remembering for a moment, but suddenly found myself an amnesia patient in the doctor's office. Her tone seemed to die down as she just began to follow me to a small log we both sat on. I kicked at the dirt a little and she joined me. It was a nice moment in my mind, as I can remember it, my last normal moment. Mikey. The loud scream ripping through the forest. My name. I looked quickly at the direction it came from, and back to Sarah, her face white, a look of terror that still rings clear in my head. I could imagine my face looked just as bad, as I quickly got up from the log, dirt spraying in front of me. I started running in the direction it came from. I knew it was Alex and I knew he was in trouble. I lost sight of Sarah, and everything became a blur. I got lightheaded, and then another scream. This wasn't Alex. And I was lost. Alex, I screamed through the blank green all around me, Tommy. The forest became a nightmare. I started moving in all different directions. After a while the dark started peering over the trees, the stars becoming eyes staring at me. After about 10 minutes of darkness I gave up, and sat myself on the dirt. I wanted to cry. How could I have been so stupid? I got back up, determined to do something, to be able to get home. I couldn't push the fear away though, and suddenly I became aware of the silence. Minutes went by and there were no birds, there were no squirrels. I couldn't even find a single ant on the rough dirt floor. It was as if something sucked all the life out of the planet, the only thing left, the creature making the screaming noise. I took another step and tripped, a small root catching my feet. That was the last straw. I broke down crying. After about 2 minutes of me feeling sorry for myself, I heard something rustling in the bush. My eyes darted around me to the patch of open path right in front of me. "Hello," I called out into the night, and immediately realized how stupid that was. "Hello." I forgot about the injury as I started scrambling to get up. It was silent again, but I didn't stop to dwell, I just ran. I changed direction almost every 5 minutes, hoping to lose whoever replied. About 10 minutes later, I saw something that made me stop running. It looked like a cave. It might have been about the first grayish-black thing I had seen yet, almost as dark as the night, but very reflective in the moonlight. It had jagged edges, and looked as if an adult could only get through crawling on their knees, almost a perfect size for me. I took a few steps closer to it, a faint whistling sound coming from deep inside. To this day I don't know why I went inside. I can't tell you what overcame me, what powerful force willed my small feet to move into that dark area. But when I stepped a few feet inside, it wasn't dark. I could see everything. Every outline of the cave wall, every rock and stone in the cave. It was as if I became nocturnal. I couldn't comprehend it. I kept going. I came into a split into the middle of the cave, right, left. I went right. As my footsteps echoed through the small space, I started to creep slowly, afraid something would hear me. It was only a few minutes before the cave widened. I was able to go up on my toes and not touch the ceiling. The elongated cave spread out, and I could see something in the distance. It was in a rectangular shape, and even in the bare light of the cave I could see every edge, every surface, every carved symbol. I stepped closer, a stench rising from the area. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was wretched. I had to plug my nose as I creeped closer to the big box. There was nothing in it. I was confused, and my mind started running. What was that smell? What was that smell? What was that smell? I looked ahead of me, as I was previously oblivious to anything but the box. I found the smell. Bodies, so many of them. Piled up to the roof of the cave, I couldn't count all of them. Were my friends in there? Tommy? Sarah? Alex? My feet wouldn't move, I just stared. My eyes wouldn't move, my feet stuck in cement. I saw women, I saw men, I saw children. Hello. I bolted, the silence broke in, and a maniacal laughter rang through the cave. And as quickly as it came it was gone, and I was quickly to the edge of the cave. I ran, and I ran, and I ran. Me feet tore against the soles of my shoes until they were numb. I was caught by so many thorns on branches it looked as if a knife was taken to every inch of my skin. I didn't stop running, I couldn't. And I was free. The tree line broke and I was back outside, my backyard in view. I kept running and running till I got to the front. There were cop cars, and I could see all the parents talking to the police, Alex and Sarah huddled next to theirs. My mom saw me, and I collapsed into her arms. We started crying, and neither of us said a word. The silence didn't last long though. Tommy? I heard a woman cry out next to me. Where's my boy? Tommy's mom was now screaming frantically as her husband tried to contain her. Both their faces damp in the glow of the moon. My boy. Tommy. Tommy never came home. I'm a physical anthropologist, and I don't know why my collection of bones keeps getting smaller. I work as a physical anthropologist at a pretty well-known university, together with a team of PhD students. It was about 3 months ago that the first bones started to get lost, if I recall correctly. I was working with one of my students, Paul, sorting my collection of bones. We had to move office to a smaller space, because, well, with all the new technologies being developed, the need for hands-on skeletal and anatomy research sadly is decreasing rapidly. The new office was small and located in one of the faraway buildings on campus grounds. The building was very old, and apart from us, no one was using it except for storage of the history department. We were working on the final crate of the day, ticking off every piece of inventory on our lists, when Paul asked me, "Sir, do you know if the gorilla skull with label 155 is maybe in another crate? It's supposed to be here, but I can't seem to find it." I came over and looked at the plastic crate, which was empty with its previous contents neatly laid out in groups besides it. I noticed that indeed there was no gorilla skull. Oh well, I must have put it in another crate. We'll see if we can find it tomorrow when we process the last few boxes. After this we went home, and due to a sudden flu that struck Paul we could only finish the boxes a week later. We completely forgot about the missing skull, and other than that nothing else was missing. Gradually over the next few weeks small things started being lost. A couple of the ribs were suddenly not in their drawer anymore. 6 lumbar vertebrae that, according to the inventory, should have been there. An entire box of human incisor teeth that were gone. I thought that maybe one of my students was trying to play an elaborate joke, or maybe they needed them for their own side project research. All of them denied both of these allegations, though. Until a couple of weeks later one of my favorite bones disappeared. I have a large human femur bone on a kind of stand in my office. I'm a very grotesque weird nerd, I know. Apart from the obvious bone collection, I also collect various other medical specimens, which also reside in the storage room. One day I was late at night grading a paper and out of habit gazed up at the bookshelf across my desk. There was the stand, but the bone that used to rest upon it was gone. Okay guys, it's really not funny anymore. I get that you may have your own research projects, but you do not steal from my personal belongings. We have enough femurs in storage to use, but please just freaking ask first. This is not okay. I want it back by tomorrow. I typed in our group chat. Once again everyone either said they had nothing to do with it, or tactically kept their mouths shut. It was late after all, and no one else was in the office. Still pissed because of the missing femur, I walked towards our storage room to see if I could find a suitable replacement for the time being. When entering I felt a weird chill, but I brushed it off as it being late at night in a cold storage room surrounded by bones. Suddenly my heart stopped as I saw what could only be described as a gruesome scene. My collection of medical specimens were toppled over, their preservation fluids spilled all over the floor. Various organs lay scattered on the floor, the pungent smell hitting me in the face. On closer inspection, I noticed there was something wrong with the organs. They were incomplete. It looked like something took a bite out of the lungs and the heart, the walls of the organs torn to shreds. Almost immediately I heard something scuffle on the other side of the storage room. I kept as silent as I could, and then I heard the most chilling sound. A crunching snap. The breaking of bones. Gnawing. Trying to see where the sound came from I peered past one of the shelves. What I saw made my heart drop. A tall, slender gray figure was standing over a box that contained 5 Native American skulls. The humanoid creature reached into the box and pulled out a skull, while it made some sort of horrible static humming sound. It then made the same sound as before. A crunching snap. The breaking of bones. Gnawing. The creature, almost instantaneously, bit straight through the cranium of the skull. It cracked like a walnut. Finally, I partially overcame my dread and I made a run for the door of the storage. I heard the creature reacting as its long arms accidentally knocked over one of the shelves. I could hear its footsteps right behind me as I opened the door and sprinted down the stairs to my car. In a panic, I started my engine and watched how the creature stood in the doorframe of the building. It was standing completely still and its white eyes were peering straight into my soul. It was the most unnerving sight I have ever seen. While driving through the forest that encompasses the campus, I swear I saw it stand behind trees in my rearview mirror. I think it is stalking me. I don't know what it. I just pulled over on the side of a road to write this memoir in case anything happens. I have no idea where I'm going, but I feel like I can't stop for longer before it finds me again. Please help me. I have no idea what this is or what I should do. When I was 14, I developed a weird hobby. To start with, I just want to say, I wasn't a bad kid. I did some pretty shitty stuff, but I wasn't intentionally bad. Guess in the end, intentions don't matter much, though. The town I grew up in was small. We had a main street with shops like the post office, bakery, and butchers, and apart from a small block of concrete with a few pipes bolted down, the local skate park, and I use that term very loosely, that was about it. We were a mining town, so most of the men went to the quarry during the week, while the women stayed in town, teaching and nursing, running the bakery and stores alike. Our lives were set in stone, or at least they were meant to be. We would, like the generations before us, grow up and begin the same work our parents and grandparents did, having our own children and the cycle repeating. And maybe it would have, had things been different. According to my parents, or my mother at least, I was a wild child. Ever since I was little, I seemed to want to explore more. I was more headstrong, more questioning, than the other little girls she taught in nursery. She said it jokingly, half-heartedly, but I saw something else in her expression, something that looked and felt like fear. My father never said much, just stared over his glasses, his bushy eyebrows perched between a frown and a grimace whenever I spoke. I learned to avoid him when he was home, only really seeing him at supper time, and while we ate there was little time for words. Every night Mom would do something to help others. She would sew and mend clothing for the children at her school, but poor families having little chance of buying new, and the second-hand clothing was always ripped and dirty. Dad smoked his pipe, sat on his recliner in the lounge, drowning out his family in the hum of the radio, where a man's voice played out, telling stories and fables. I snuck out, feeling the cool night air against my skin, the goosebumps of danger with doing the wrong thing. I tried to convince my friends to join me, but no one else would. I loved my friends, I did, but they were similar to my parents in the way they didn't want to do anything much. They stayed in reading novels, or helping their mamas bake, sorting tools for their dads who did home improvement projects. Most families were the same in this town. I'd always had a suspicion, but once I began sneaking out of my house, I started sneaking into others. It was an accident the very first time, honest. I saw a house, the curtains still open, but there were no lights on inside. I stood outside and stared in. I could sort of make out the lounge suite and see there were framed photos on the walls. For some reason, I just walked towards it, intrigued to be looking in at someone else's life, I guess. I don't know. I tried the front door, which was unlocked. I wasn't surprised. No one, including my family, bothered with locking the doors. We were a small and safe town. Our crime rate was basically non-existent. The door swung open and I closed it gently behind me, my heart pounding as I stood quietly at the threshold, just waiting to hear footsteps or voices at any moment. But nothing happened. I regained composure and stared to snoop around. I wasn't going to steal anything. I had no need. I just simply looked around, wondering about the family, about their lives. After a while of exploring the house, I left, making sure nothing was out of place. I closed the door softly behind me and walked home. They would never know anyone had been inside their house. I had found a new hobby. I was a weird kid, sure. But I never meant to harm anybody. I did it more and more, any empty place I could find. I had some close calls, with cars pulling into the driveway while I was still upstairs in a bedroom, the front door opening before I had time to close the back door I'd escaped through. I was never caught, though. I wish I had been. I wish to God someone had caught me. It's been a reoccurring fantasy for years, the dream I dream over and over, the one I wake up in a cold sweat from, tears burning my eyes, bile burning my stomach. But no one caught me in their house, no one stopped me. So I went to the house on Lefroy Street, and what happened there changed my life forever. That night, it was cold. I was about to give up. I'd been out for an hour at least, and not come across one empty house. I felt tired, anxious. There was no reason for it, not one I could pinpoint. I made the choice to head home, get out of the damp, and so I began walking. I was near my street when I saw a familiar car speed off down the road. Mr. Chestermore. He was a teacher at my school, and apparently, so the gossiping girls at school claimed, he had some terrible accident years before, which meant he wasn't fit for work in the mines, so that's why he was one of the rare males who held a job in the city. He taught science and he was pretty nice, always taking the time to listen to us and explain things in a kind way. He walked with a hobble and a special cane, which made the gossip's rumors seem to be more than maybe just Chinese whispers, but no one really knew for sure. The rumors ranged from the accident being shooting himself in the leg while hunting to being stabbed by a group of ninjas. I know. Looking back, that just sounds ridiculous, but you gotta remember, we were just kids back then. I had the idea then to go to his house, to see what he lived like, to see if I could find any information about the accident, maybe find the truth about what happened, and I'd been so popular, everyone would want to be my friend. My 14-year-old brain thought it would be cool to be the one to break the mystery of our teacher, but looking back as an adult, I can't help but feel such sadness at the invasion of privacy I had bestowed on a kind, gentle teacher. His door was unlocked, of course it was. I slid inside, silent and smooth, carefully closing the door behind me and set to work straight away. The house was nondescript, the same style furniture I'd seen in all the other homes, including my own. A cat litter tray sat in the corner of the lounge, but there was no sign of the cat. I wondered if it may be hiding from me, perhaps curled up under the couch, and the more I thought it, the more I felt the sense as though I was really being watched. I'd never felt uneasy in a house before, not even while I was close to getting caught. It was, in a strange way, an excitement, a thrill, and nearly getting caught, and the feeling I felt that night. It was different. It was my senses, urging me to get the hell out of there. But my 14-year-old self didn't listen, and instead I forged on, finding myself in a cupboard under the staircase when I heard a voice above me. I held in a shocked gasp, racking my brain thinking if I had been quiet enough, waiting for the partially closed door behind me to be pulled open and me exposed. But it didn't happen. The voice was muffled at first thought, and bizarrely it sounded as if whoever it was humming show tunes. The voice rose, getting louder, and I tried hard to make out what they were saying. I wish I hadn't. The man was talking to a softly sobbing child, telling them they must stop crying at once, everything was okay. He began to hum the show tunes again, this time louder and more aggressively. It didn't seem to help, as the child began to wail louder, sobs turning into terrified screams that, after a loud bang, suddenly ceased. It sounded as if someone, had been thrown against the wall. I heard a soft thud a few moments after the bang, as if whatever it was had slid down the wall and onto the hardwood floor below. The silence didn't stay for long. The man began muttering something to himself that I couldn't quite make out, something that sounded like "made me" and "shush." He repeated it over and over, until his show tune's humming began again, and until that too was drowned out by the sound of water running. It seemed to run for a long time, the pipes in the walls next to me groaning, sounding like ghosts moaning. I felt scared. More than scared. I thought about making my escape, but I couldn't hear where the man was, and it didn't feel safe to try and leave when he could literally be waiting outside the door. The door was open a crack, and with a racing heart, I leant down to try and take a peek, and that's when I saw the flash of pink fabric, the pink princess dressing gown of someone small and who should have been safe in bed. I wanted to reach out, to grab her, stop her from investigating the strange noises that must have woken her up from a peaceful slumber. But I stood, fearful and motionless. I didn't try and grab her. I didn't stop her. When I heard her blood-curdling scream just seconds later, I tasted salt on my lips and realized I was crying. "Janny? Why are you on the floor? Why is your head red? Wake up, Janny. Are you just tricking me like on Halloween? I'm going to get Mom if you don't get up." The footsteps above me were slow, deliberate, and soon I heard the girl in the pink princess dressing gown choking and spluttering and saying no, no, no. Again, it was silent. Again, I heard the thump of someone, being dropped or falling on the hardwood floor above me. The man began muttering again, and then I heard the footsteps taper off, the sound of my own thumping heart the only thing I could hear. I took my chance. I didn't try to peek out of the door, I just pushed it open. It didn't squeak, but the anticipation of it doing so did as much damage to my stress levels as if it had. Silence. The hallway was empty. The front door was in view. A few steps. A few big steps and I was out the front door. I was gone. But then I heard the groan. It wasn't coming from upstairs, but next to me. I stifled a scream, my body screaming not to look down, do not look down, but I did. I looked. A woman lay just ahead, blood pooling around her, streaks of blood on the floor in thick lines where she had dragged herself toward the front door from wherever she had been hurt. Her face was half gone, the bone and teeth exposed on her lower jaw. One eye was swollen closed, her nose dried with black blood. Her legs were missing from below the knees. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask if she was okay. Or to scream, I have no fucking idea. I think I was in shock. For a kid who wasn't even allowed to play video games, I hadn't been exposed to a lot. That's what I've told myself all these years anyway. Tried to justify it to myself, for not helping, for being scared. Anyway, when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I shook my head at her, my mouth wide open yet wordless. I wanted to tell her I was going to get help, but I couldn't form the words. She blinked at me for a moment, the realization sinking in. She was as good as dead, and that's literally what happened. I saw the light go out of her eyes before it really went out. She lay and stared, not seeing. I haven't told people this full story. Only bits and pieces. But everyone says the same. It wasn't my fault. I was just a kid. But they don't know the truth. I can't bring myself to tell anyone. The words get caught in my throat. So I have to write it down, get it out. I had just about reached the front door when I heard the sound that sent shivers down my spine, a cold rock to the bottom of my stomach. I heard a baby wail. But I pretended I didn't. I pretended that it was just in my head, lying to myself to save myself. What a joke. I should have done something. I was at the end of the street when I saw the car of my science teacher drive back down the road toward the house I had just escaped. I wanted to warn him. But of course, I didn't. I ran home and didn't look back. It was all over the paper in the days and weeks after. The first murder-suicide in our town. I heard my parents talking about it when they thought I was in bed, how Mr. Chestermore went crazy and killed his entire family before barbarically killing himself. But it wasn't a murder-suicide. There was a lunatic on the loose who had killed a whole family and framed an innocent man. I tried my best to forget about it, to move on, not blame myself. I became a good kid, and I didn't go into anyone's empty homes anymore. I tried my best to make amends for what I hadn't done. That's why I'm a social worker these days. I moved on from that night when I was 14, or so I thought, until recently when I had a new client. James. He was 12. His parents had been going through a messy divorce and James had taken it upon himself to find a new hobby. He had started breaking into homes and stealing. It wasn't my first sort of case. He had broken into a home and killed the couple, but it was the first time that one of the kids said something that truly terrified me. James told me it wasn't him, there was another man there, one who muttered to himself and hummed along to show tunes. I haven't slept right since talking with James. I swear if I listen hard enough as I lay awake in bed at night, I can make out that hum of show tunes coming from somewhere in my house. I've checked a dozen times. No one is ever there. But the sound remains. I don't know if I'm going crazy or not. Maybe getting my truths out about what happened that night might help me. I've tried to contact the police, but they tell me the case is closed, long closed. That I need to let things go. I wish it was as simple as that. If there's any updates, I'll be sure to let you know.